The Galactic Empire had ruled the stars for millennia, expanding its influence across countless worlds. It prided itself on military dominance, technological superiority, and an iron grip over every species under its rule. No civilization had ever truly challenged its might, until humanity arrived. Earth had developed spaceflight late compared to the older species, but humans learned fast. Faster than anyone expected. In just a few centuries, they had reverse-engineered alien technology, built interstellar warships, and expanded beyond their solar system. They weren't a major power yet, but they were ambitious, and that was enough to make the Empire take notice. So when humanity requested a seat at the Interstellar Military Council, the Empire agreed, though not because they saw Earth as an equal. They allowed it for one reason only: to humiliate them. Inside the Empire's Grand War Hall, high-ranking admirals and generals gathered to witness Earth's so-called greatest warship. A holographic display projected an image of the newly built vessel, the Dauntless. At first, there was silence. Then, the laughter started. This is their prototype," scoffed Admiral Kryn, a reptilian warlord whose fleet had crushed a dozen rebellious worlds. "It's barely the size of a corvette. The hull plating, primitive alloys, nowhere near Imperial standards." Another officer sneered. "And look at the weapons. No mass drivers, no kinetic bombardment systems. What do they fight with?" Harsh language. The room erupted with more laughter. Even the neutral species in attendance, those who had once been wary of humanity's rapid development, shook their heads in amusement. Earth had spent years petitioning for military recognition, only to present this: a toy. Across the chamber, the human delegation sat in silence, their expressions unreadable. Captain Elias Voss, the man chosen to command the Dauntless, watched the spectacle without a word. He was a man of sharp instincts, forged in Earth's brutal conflicts against pirates, rogue AI, and interstellar raiders. Unlike the decorated admirals of the Empire, Elias had fought wars where every battle was do or die, where cunning mattered more than raw firepower. He wasn't surprised by the reaction. He had expected it. Earth's ambassador, an older statesman named Arlen Grant, finally spoke. His voice was calm but firm. "You judge based on appearance," he said, "but appearances can be deceiving." Kryn smirked. "Oh, then prove it." That was when the Empire proposed their friendly war game, a test to determine whether the Dauntless was worth anything at all. Humanity would be given a chance to showcase their prototype against a small squadron of Imperial warships. 5 minutes. That's all they had to survive. It was meant to be a joke, a show of force, a reminder that humanity was still a minor species playing in an arena far beyond its league. Elias exchanged a glance with his crew. They all knew the truth. The Empire had just made a terrible mistake. The announcement of the war game sent a ripple of amusement through the Imperial military. The entire event was little more than a staged performance, a final humiliation before dismissing Earth's ambitions once and for all. Word spread quickly. Across the Empire, officers, aristocrats, and spectators eagerly tuned in to watch the so-called battle. Many placed bets, not on whether the Dauntless would win, but on how long it would last before being completely destroyed. The most generous estimate was 2 minutes. Captain Elias Voss sat in the Dauntless command chair, watching the Imperial fleet assemble. The battlefield was a designated war zone in deep space, far from any inhabited worlds. Against him were 5 Imperial warships, a small force by Imperial standards, but still overwhelming compared to his lone vessel. The lead ship, the Vindicator, was a heavy cruiser, bristling with enough weapons to lay waste to an entire fleet. Surrounding it were 4 escort-class warships, each faster and more maneuverable than anything Earth had ever faced in open combat. From the Imperial flagship, Admiral Kryn's voice echoed through the comms. "Human vessel, your objective is simple. Survive for 5 minutes. If you can do that, we will acknowledge Earth's military capabilities." his voice tripped with amusement. "Let's see if your little experiment can last that long." Elias didn't bother responding. He knew the truth. This wasn't a test. It was a public execution. The war game begins. A loud chime signaled the start of the battle. The moment it did, the Imperial ships moved into formation, surrounding the Dauntless like a pack of wolves circling wounded prey. Their weapons charged, targeting systems locking on. Elias exhaled slowly. His crew sat tense at their stations, waiting for the inevitable barrage. "Hold fire," he ordered. Seconds later, the first wave of plasma torpedoes streaked toward them. Bright green spheres of energy, each one powerful enough to tear through most modern shielding, rushed forward in a synchronized assault. But before they could hit, something happened that no Imperial officer expected. The Dauntless vanished. 1 second, it was there. The next, it was gone. Gasps erupted across the Imperial fleet. On board the Vindicator, Admiral Kryn shot forward in his seat, eyes wide in disbelief. What? Where did they? His question was cut short as the Imperial warships scrambled to adjust their sensors. "We've lost visual," one of his officers reported. "The human ship is not on any of our scanners." Kryn's claws curled into the armrests of his chair. That wasn't possible. No ship, not even Imperial stealth cruisers, could completely disappear from detection. Then, before anyone could react, the Dauntless reappeared, directly behind one of the Imperial warships. The first shot. Elias didn't hesitate. Fire. A concentrated energy blast lanced out from the Dauntless, striking the enemy ship's exposed engines. The shot was impossibly precise, aimed at the one vulnerable spot no Imperial captain ever worried about, because no enemy had ever been fast enough to exploit it. The result was instant. The escort ship exploded in a brilliant flash, sending debris spiraling through the void. The Imperial spectators, watching from their homeworlds, fell into stunned silence. This wasn't supposed to happen. The humans were supposed to lose. Inside the Imperial fleet, panic set in. The war game had just begun, and the Dauntless was hunting. The destruction of the first Imperial warship sent shockwaves through the battlefield. Every Imperial officer watching the match had expected an effortless slaughter, a demonstration of Earth's inferiority. Instead, they had just witnessed something impossible, an Earth-built prototype outmaneuvering and destroying an Imperial warship in a single strike. Inside the Vindicator, Admiral Kryn's amusement vanished, replaced by cold fury. "How?" he growled, slamming a clawed fist onto his command console. "How did they evade our scanners? What kind of trick is this?" His officers frantically searched for an explanation, but there was none. Humanity was supposed to be centuries behind the Empire in stealth technology. And yet, the Dauntless had disappeared from all detection, repositioned, and struck with deadly precision before anyone even realized what was happening. The remaining 4 Imperial warships immediately changed formation, their commanders no longer treating this as a joke. Inside the Dauntless, Elias Voss watched their movements with sharp eyes. His crew was buzzing with adrenaline, but he remained calm. They weren't expecting that, Lieutenant Rena Carter said from the tactical console, her voice barely concealing her excitement. "They won't make the same mistake twice," Elias replied. "Now they're actually going to try." The Empire strikes back. The Imperial fleet wasted no time. The moment their systems reacquired the Dauntless, they launched a second barrage, a full salvo of plasma torpedoes, railgun fire, and energy lances. This time, it wasn't just a test shot. It was an execution order. But the Dauntless was ready. "Evasive pattern Delta 7, Elias commanded. The ship vanished again, this time, flickering in and out of view like a ghost. Every time an enemy targeting system locked on, the Dauntless twisted away at impossible speeds. Its gravimetric drive, a revolutionary human invention, allowed it to move in ways Imperial ships couldn't predict, strafing, pivoting, accelerating in nonlinear patterns. Plasma torpedoes passed harmlessly through the space where the Dauntless had been only milliseconds before. Railgun shells ripped through empty void, hitting nothing but shattered debris. The Empire's warships weren't just missing, they were wasting ammunition. The counterattack. Elias saw his opening. Target the second escort, midsection. Full power. A deep hum resonated through the Dauntless as its main weapon, a focused energy lance, charged up. Unlike Imperial plasma cannons, which relied on brute force, this weapon functioned like a surgical scalpel, channeling all of its power into a pinpoint beam. It fired. The lance struck dead center on the enemy escort's hull, slicing through both its shielding and armor plating as if they were paper. In an instant, the warship's internal structure collapsed, its entire midsection imploding before a secondary explosion tore it apart. 2 ships down. The Imperial fleet was in chaos. Panic in the Empire. Inside the Vindicator, alarms blared. Kryn watched in stunned silence as another one of his ships was reduced to flaming wreckage. "This isn't possible," one of his officers stammered. "No human ship should be able to." "They're cheating," Kryn snarled. "They have to be." But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. This wasn't a trick. This wasn't luck. Humanity had built something the Empire didn't understand. And now, the once-mocked prototype was systematically dismantling his fleet. For the first time in his career, Admiral Kryn felt something unfamiliar creeping up his spine. Fear. Panic spread through the Imperial fleet like wildfire. The war game was supposed to be an effortless demonstration of Imperial superiority, a theatrical display for the galaxy to watch humanity's humiliating defeat. Instead, the spectators sat in stunned silence as the Dauntless, the ship they had mocked, had already destroyed 2 Imperial warships and taken 0 damage in return. Inside the command deck of the Vindicator, Admiral Kryn's claws dug into the armrests of his chair. His reptilian eyes flickered with something he hadn't felt in decades: uncertainty. The humans were not fighting the way Imperial officers were trained to expect. They weren't relying on brute force. They weren't using predictable tactics. They were thinking. The hunter becomes the hunted. The remaining 3 Imperial warships moved to reposition. Their original battle plan, overwhelm the human vessel with superior firepower, had failed spectacularly. The new plan was simple: box the Dauntless in and destroy it before it could disappear again. The 2 remaining escort ships accelerated to flank positions, cutting off potential escape vectors. Meanwhile, the Vindicator powered up its primary plasma cannon, an Imperial superweapon capable of reducing most capital ships to molten slag with a single concentrated blast. Kryn sneered. "Let's see them vanish from this." Inside the Dauntless, Elias Voss studied their formation with quiet amusement. "They're learning," he muttered. Lieutenant Rena Carter smirked from the weapons console. "Too little, too late." Elias nodded. "They think we've been running. Time to remind them who the real hunters are." His fingers tightened on the controls. "Bring up the pulse drive. Full charge." The death blow. The Imperial warships fired. Everything. A storm of plasma, railgun shells, and missile volleys roared through space, converging on the Dauntless. The sheer volume of fire was enough to obliterate a small moon. But at the last second, before impact, the Dauntless jumped. Not through a conventional warp, not through an escape trajectory. Instead, it blinked forward, directly into the heart of the Imperial formation. The maneuver was impossible. No ship should have been able to navigate a battlefield at those speeds without colliding with debris, much less reposition itself into a combat-effective angle. But the Dauntless did. And the first thing it did when it reappeared: fire. A split-second blast of the energy lance tore through the 3rd escort's bridge, cutting it clean in half before its reactors detonated in a fireball. 3 down. The explosion sent shockwaves through the remaining ships, forcing them to adjust their positions, exactly what Elias had been waiting for. Before the last escort ship could react, the Dauntless spun into a lateral dive, its plasma cannons unloading a concentrated barrage of rapid-fire pulses along the enemy vessel's weapons array. One shot disabled its targeting systems. The second ruptured its engines. The third split its hull open. The final escort was reduced to drifting wreckage within seconds. 4 down. And now, only one ship remained. The face of fear. Inside the Vindicator, Admiral Kryn stared in horror at the battlefield. His elite warships, some of the finest vessels in the Empire, had been eliminated one by one. And the Dauntless had yet to take a single hit. Kryn's mouth went dry. He had fought countless wars. He had crushed rebellious species beneath his fleet. He had executed planetary bombardments without hesitation. But he had never seen anything like this. He wasn't fighting a lesser species. He wasn't fighting an experimental prototype. He was fighting a monster. And it was coming for him. The battlefield was eerily silent. The once mighty Imperial squadron had been reduced to wreckage, its warships torn apart by a vessel they had mocked as a child's toy. Only one ship remained, the Vindicator, Admiral Kryn's flagship. Inside its command center, the bridge crew worked frantically, their once arrogant demeanor replaced with barely concealed fear. Kryn, however, remained rigid in his chair, his reptilian eyes locked on the only enemy left in the field, the Dauntless. His claws dug into his armrests as he stared at the human vessel, still untouched, still moving with the terrifying precision of a predator. It had hunted his fleet, eliminated his best warships, and now it was coming for him. His voice was steady, but there was no longer confidence in it. "Send a distress call to the fleet," he ordered. "All available warships, get them here. Now." Calling the Empire's hammer, the order shot across Imperial space like a desperate beacon. Kryn's forces had been so confident in their superiority that they hadn't stationed reinforcements nearby. After all, why would they? Now, they needed them. Within moments, Imperial High Command received the transmission. Confusion turned to disbelief. Disbelief turned to rage. A mere human prototype had wiped out a battle-tested Imperial squadron. It was impossible. And yet, the live transmission from Kryn's fleet showed the wreckage drifting in space, the remains of once unstoppable warships, torn apart by something the Empire couldn't explain. The response from Imperial High Command was swift. Reinforcements were inbound. Not just 1 or 2 ships. An entire Imperial battle fleet. The last stand. Inside the Dauntless, Elias Voss observed the situation with cold calculation. His crew had been expecting victory, but not like this. They just called in an entire fleet, Lieutenant Rena Carter reported, her voice tight. "If we wait here, we'll be fighting against hundreds of warships in minutes." Elias exhaled slowly. The mission had never been to win against the full force of the Galactic Empire. That was suicide. But it had been about proving a point. And they weren't done yet. His eyes flicked to the Vindicator, the only enemy left in the immediate battle. Kryn's flagship was a behemoth, heavily shielded, its armor reinforced to withstand planetary bombardments. But it didn't need to be destroyed to achieve their objective. It just needed to be humiliated. Elias turned to his helmsman. "Bring us in close. A message they won't forget." The Dauntless surged forward, cutting through the wreckage of destroyed Imperial warships like a shadow in the void. Inside the Vindicator, alarms blared. Kryn watched in horror as the human vessel raced directly toward him. Not to flee, not to reposition, but to attack. His bridge crew panicked. "They're coming right at us. Shields at maximum. Prepare counterfire." But the Dauntless didn't fire. Instead, it stopped, right in front of the Vindicator's bridge. For a long moment, neither ship moved. The two vessels faced each other in the silence of space, separated by a mere handful of kilometers. And then, the Dauntless did something no one expected. It opened a transmission. Elias Voss appeared on the Vindicator's main screen, his expression unreadable. His voice, however, was calm. Too calm. "Admiral Kryn," he said, tilting his head slightly. "You lost." Silence on the bridge. Kryn's claws flexed, his mouth opening. But he had no words. Elias leaned forward slightly, his next words carrying across the vastness of space, broadcasted across every Imperial channel. "We could have destroyed your ship. You know that." He let the words sink in. "But we didn't. You want to know why?" Kryn remained silent. The entire Empire was listening. "Because this," Elias gestured at the wreckage. "This was just a test." The Dauntless pulsed its engines and began to turn away. Elias' final words before cutting the transmission would haunt the Empire for years. "Next time, we won't hold back." And with that, the Dauntless vanished into the void. The transmission cut, leaving the bridge of the Vindicator in dead silence. The crew barely moved, their expressions frozen in shock and humiliation. Admiral Kryn sat stiffly in his chair, his claws still gripping the armrests, his mind racing through the impossible events that had just unfolded. He had lost. Not just a battle, but his entire fleet. Not just a fleet, but the Empire's invincible reputation. And worst of all, the humans had let him live. Not out of mercy. Not out of weakness. As a message. Empire in chaos. The aftermath of the battle spread through the Galactic Empire like wildfire. The war game had been broadcasted live, meant to showcase humanity's failure. Instead, every citizen, every officer, and every ruling noble had witnessed the Dauntless obliterate an Imperial squadron, without taking a single hit. The reaction was instant and devastating. The noble houses panicked. They had long funded the Imperial fleets under the promise that no enemy could challenge them. If humanity, a young, primitive race, could dismantle an entire Imperial squadron, what else were they capable of? The military splintered. The admirals and generals whispered behind closed doors, arguing over how to respond. Some called for immediate retaliation, demanding the full force of the Empire be unleashed on Earth. Others hesitated, terrified at what that might provoke. Because now, for the first time in history, there was doubt. Had the Empire already lost, and just didn't know it yet? The Emperor's wrath. Admiral Kryn stood in front of the Imperial throne, his head bowed. The chamber was vast and cold, the air thick with tension. The Emperor, an ancient and calculating ruler, sat on his elevated throne, his piercing golden eyes locked on Kryn. The silence stretched unbearably long. Then finally, the Emperor spoke. "You failed." The words carried more weight than any execution order. Kryn clenched his jaw. "Your Majesty, we underestimated them. Their ship." The Emperor raised a single clawed finger, and Kryn fell silent. "You told me the humans were insignificant." The Emperor's voice was cold, unreadable. "You told me this would be a lesson for them. Instead, they have taught us." Kryn's breath caught. "What would you have me do?" he asked carefully. For a long moment, the Emperor was silent, his gaze distant. Then, slowly, he leaned forward. "We cannot allow this humiliation to stand." His voice was soft, but the weight behind it was absolute. "The Dauntless is not a warship." His eyes narrowed. "It is a declaration." He stood, his flowing robes trailing behind him. "Mobilize the fleets." Kryn stiffened. "Your Majesty, if we escalate." "We already lost by underestimating them." The Emperor snapped. "Now we will remind them why the Empire rules the stars." A pause. Then a single order. "Earth will burn." Meanwhile, on Earth, deep beneath the surface of Earth's military command center, Captain Elias Voss stood in front of a darkened holomap, his hands behind his back. Around him, Earth's highest-ranking military officials and scientists sat in tense silence. The news had already reached them. The Empire wasn't going to retreat. They were going to invade. A low hum filled the room as the holomap flickered to life, showing incoming Imperial fleet movements. Hundreds of ships, dreadnoughts, battleships, carriers. A force strong enough to erase a species from existence. Earth's leaders looked to Elias, the man who had just provoked an empire. His face was unreadable. Then, slowly, he exhaled and spoke. "We knew this was coming." His voice was steady. "And we're ready." He turned to his officers, his expression dark and certain. "They think Earth is defenseless. Let's show them how wrong they are." The vastness of space trembled as the Imperial Armada surged forward. Hundreds of warships, each one a city-sized behemoth bristling with weapons, moved with terrifying precision. This was not a battle fleet. This was an extermination force. The Emperor had made his decision. Earth would burn. From his command chair aboard the Imperial dreadnought Sovereign Wrath, Admiral Kryn watched the fleet's approach toward the Sol system. His humiliation in the war game had left him desperate for revenge. This time, there would be no arrogance, no underestimating the humans. He would reduce their planet to ash. "Time to target," he growled. 15 hours, his lieutenant reported. Kryn exhaled sharply, gripping his armrest. Soon, it would be over. Earth's silent defense. On Earth, tension filled the underground war room. The holographic display showed the incoming Imperial fleet, an overwhelming force of dreadnoughts, battleships, and carriers, more than 500 warships. The room was silent. Then, General Helena Strauss spoke. "That's more ships than they used to wipe out the Xilari homeworld." Her voice was quiet but heavy. Everyone knew what that meant. The Xilari had been an advanced species. They had fought. They had resisted. They had been erased from existence. But Elias Voss didn't flinch. He simply nodded. "Then we'd better make sure they regret coming here." The officers turned to him. The man who had commanded the Dauntless, the man who had shattered the Empire's arrogance, the man who had brought them to this moment. "Are the defenses ready?" he asked. A scientist, Dr. Marcus Leon, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Yes, but Captain Voss, this isn't just a defense. Once we commit, there's no going back." Elias exhaled. He already knew that. Earth wasn't just going to fight. They were going to make a statement. He looked at the holographic projection. The Imperial fleet loomed closer. "It's time," he said. "The trap is sprung." Hours later, the Imperial fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system. The gleaming blue dot of Earth sat in the distance, small, insignificant. The warships moved into formation, their weapons primed. Admiral Kryn sat forward in his chair. "All ships, prepare planetary bombardment. We end this now." But then, something changed. A sudden, sharp alarm blared through the bridge of the Sovereign Wrath. Kryn's eyes flickered to the tactical display. Dozens of unknown energy signatures were activating. "What is that?" he snapped. A junior officer's voice wavered. "Sir, I think it's a trap." Suddenly, the void of space around Earth erupted with light. Hundreds of hidden human warships, long dormant orbital defense platforms, and cloaked asteroid bases came to life at once. Massive energy barriers flickered into place, sealing the system's exits. And then, Earth opened fire. The ambush of the century. Beams of concentrated plasma tore through the Imperial front lines. Railgun slugs the size of buildings shattered enemy hulls. Electromagnetic pulse bursts disabled key command ships before they could react. The Empire had walked into a kill zone. Admiral Kryn's eyes widened as the first 50 Imperial warships were obliterated in seconds. This wasn't just resistance. This was a slaughter. And then, through the chaos, a single haunting message appeared on every Imperial screen. A familiar voice. Elias Voss. He stared directly into the camera, his expression cold, calculating. "You wanted war." His voice was calm, unshaken. "Welcome to Earth." And with that, the battle truly began. The void of space became a death trap for the Empire. The once mighty Imperial Armada, confident in its unstoppable power, had walked straight into Earth's ambush. And now, it was being torn apart. The turning tide. On board the Sovereign Wrath, Admiral Kryn gripped the edge of his console, his scales slick with cold sweat. "Status report," he barked. An officer's voice cracked with panic. "We've lost nearly 100 ships in the opening salvo. Admiral, their defenses." Another explosion rocked the Sovereign Wrath, and the officer's console fizzled out in a shower of sparks. Kryn's eyes darted to the tactical display. It was a nightmare. Human warships, once considered laughable, were now outmaneuvering, outgunning, and outclassing the Empire's finest vessels. Their stealth systems made them nearly impossible to target. Their weapons were more advanced than anything Imperial engineers had predicted, and their tactics were unlike any the Empire had ever faced. And worst of all, they were winning. The Dauntless strikes again. Through the chaos, one ship stood out, the same ship that had humiliated the Empire before. The Dauntless. It moved like a phantom, weaving through the battlefield with unnatural precision. One moment, it was a blip on the radar. The next, it had closed the distance and delivered a kill shot. Inside its bridge, Captain Elias Voss was calm, methodical. "Target their command ships," he ordered. "Take out their leadership, and the rest will break." Lieutenant Rena Carter grinned as her fingers danced over the weapons console. With pleasure. A concentrated energy lance ripped through an Imperial battlecruiser's core, causing a chain reaction that tore the ship apart from the inside out. Another well-placed missile barrage turned an entire dreadnought into a drifting fireball. In just minutes, the Dauntless had eliminated 4 more enemy vessels. And then Elias Voss locked eyes on his final target, the Sovereign Wrath, the fall of an admiral. Inside his warship, Admiral Kryn felt the presence of death creeping closer. His once mighty fleet was being obliterated, and now, the ship that had started it all was coming for him. A sudden chill ran down his spine. This isn't a war. This is a reckoning. "Sir, the Dauntless is locking onto us," an officer shouted. Kryn snapped. "Fire EV or anything," he roared. The Sovereign Wrath unleashed its entire arsenal, *** plasma torpedoes, railgun slugs, energy beams, ***, but it didn't matter. The Dauntless vanished from their scanners. And then, it reappeared directly above them. Elias Voss' voice rang through Kryn's speakers. Calm, cold, final. Checkmate. A single precise shot from the Dauntless punched through the Sovereign Wrath's reactor core. Admiral Kryn barely had time to process what had happened before his flagship erupted into a blinding explosion, the force of the blast ripping through the Imperial fleet. Their leader was dead. The Empire retreats. The surviving Imperial warships broke formation, their commanders no longer concerned with fighting, only survival. For the first time in galactic history, the Empire was fleeing. The battle was over. Earth had won. The aftermath. Hours later, as the wreckage of hundreds of Imperial warships drifted lifelessly through space, Elias Voss stood on the bridge of the Dauntless, staring out at the battlefield. Humanity had done the impossible. They had faced the might of the Empire, and not only survived, but crushed them. A message to the galaxy. Transmission was sent across the stars, one that would shake the balance of power forever. Elias Voss appeared on screens across the Empire, his gaze steady. "The Galactic Empire came to erase us," he said. "They called us weak. They called us inferior." He leaned forward, his voice unwavering. They were wrong. The screen cut to footage of burning Imperial warships, the once feared fleet shattered beyond recognition. Elias' final words echoed across the galaxy. "Humanity is not your prey. We are the storm." And the galaxy would never be the same again.